Okay, I did get a couple really good questions. And so for the ones that were similar, I sort of boiled it down into some general ones so we can answer them. This first one is I'm struggling to find entry-level positions that pay or offer anything close to a living wage. I've received the usual advice of sometimes you have to sacrifice for a year or two, or maybe you should build your volunteer hours up. As someone who will be viewed as new or entry level, how do I communicate that one, I'm not willing to be taken advantage of, and two, that I am a skilled and well educated professional and would like to be compensated for it? Well said. So, while we did cover some of these points, let's reiterate it. First part, figure out what's acceptable to you, communicate it, and stick with it. So, especially when you're in the job searching phase, some of the phrases to think about is I'm only able to accept paid positions at this time. If you're looking for jobs and there's no salary, contacting the hiring manager or whoever would be the supervisor, the phrase, in an effort to respect your time and mine, can you please disclose the salary range for this position? Unfortunately, way too many of the job descriptions that we see in our fields don't have salary ranges. And even if they say, like, don't contact HR or whatever, which is bullshit, I recommend that you do contact HR or whoever would be the supervisor of that position and tell them just that, because there's no point for you to apply for a job that's not going to pay you whatever your rate should be, whatever you've calculated that it should be. Also, you should figure this out while you are looking for jobs so that you know what is appropriate for you and you're in a better position to go in and negotiate because you've already thought about your rate. Another thing to think about is taking a paying job in a different field while looking in the GLAMP field. And this is a newer acronym: galleries, libraries, archives, museums, public history. So GLAMP. Anyway, but to include our public history peers. So instead of volunteering, instead of taking below living wage jobs, I recommend skipping that and getting a paying job, maybe in a different field, maybe it has some crossover skills, while you're still looking for a better paying job in the GLAMP field. So there's no law saying that once you get that degree, once you enter the field, that you can only have those jobs from now on. And speaking from experience, having a job outside the field is not a penalty for applying for jobs in the field. And honestly, if anybody asks you about that, they will understand when you tell them that you are only in a position to accept paid positions that were appropriate for your level of skill. So it's not a bad thing, and especially if you do not have the financial luxury of taking those free positions, it is totally okay and probably better for your mental health to get a job in a different field while you're still looking. And if you are going to volunteer, be very choosy as to what you do. So much of the bad advice that I see is things akin to, oh, okay, if you want to work in this museum, volunteer first, and then when you see a position open up, apply for that position and you'll get it. That's how all these other people did it. And maybe that was the case back in the day. It is certainly not a common case now. It's another form of gaslighting. It's bullshit. So in order to stay in the field, though, especially if you're doing a different job for now, and to help with that networking and investing in yourself points we talked about earlier, I recommend that if you're going to volunteer, don't do it at some small museum or whatever that you want to eventually apply for a job there. Go to the professional organizations, join committees, get some leadership positions in those committees, and participate in a way that is visible. So, for example, I'm on COPA. I deeply believe in their mission, which is why I am on that committee and why I give my time freely to them. It also happens to be a committee where there is work that is visible, so helping run the blog and writing blog posts. That helps get your name out there. That helps show that you're a leader in the field, that you're contributing to the field. So you're doing it in a way that serves you being eventually compensated well for your time and being seen as a leader in the field. And I think that that is a far better use of volunteering your time than doing it at a local level and hoping that a job comes out of it after a few years. So it's my advice for that one. Question. I'm a mid-career and am still making a starting salary. I've been promised a raise, new title, etc. But now with the pandemic, my supervisor says the budget is dismal and that I'm lucky my job wasn't cut. Does this sound familiar? According to HR, I'm making the average salary of an archivist in my location. I do so much more than what my job title entails, and therefore I should be paid accordingly. Yes. I've listed all of my job duties that are beyond an archivist job title, and I've tried presenting job postings with salaries for higher level positions. But HR claims those positions don't translate to a nonprofit. So, how else can I possibly prove my worth? At this point, I feel my only option is to leave. And thank you to the person who wrote this. I received several similar ones. I appreciate the vulnerability that you're sharing with us. And this is almost verbatim what I experienced as well. And so I'm glad that you brought it to us. So, my answer is that you've done all the right things. You have done everything that I would have recommended. Listening to my story and seeing this webinar, you may have picked up a couple small things that you might try, but in reality, from what you've shared, you have done all that you can, and it's getting to the point where you may need to consider leaving or playing hardball in terms of only doing what they're paying you to do, scaling back. It really is up to you at this point in terms of what your mind and your heart can continue dealing with. For me, after 5 years of experiencing all of those things you mentioned, I just couldn't do it anymore. So I really feel for you, and I'm so sorry that you are experiencing this. Know that you are not alone. Unfortunately, so many of us have gone through all of that. So I just want to recognize you've done all the right things and there's not much else you can do. Your HR is not right, but in this case, unfortunately, there's not a lot of power that we have. And educating them and convincing them can be a slow and sometimes not a working process. So I'm very sorry. And I feel for you. So my advice would be you can try a few more things, but in the end, you need to decide whether or not you want to stick around. How can nonprofit board members, many of whom come from non-collections backgrounds, best support professionals at their institutions and advocate for the larger discipline? So thank you so much to whoever submitted this one. I am so glad to hear this thoughtful question, and I wish there were more of you out there serving on boards that have the emotional intelligence and the strategic thinking to even ask this question. So I applaud you, whoever you are. So yes, many people who serve on a board aren't collection experts. The initial purpose for that, going into board strategy for a moment, is that when you form a board, the idea is that the board members are bringing expertise and connections and funding, hopefully, that don't exist within the museum, nonprofit, whatever you are. Because the board is supposed to be volunteering their skills, their experience, their connections, etc., for whatever field they normally work in. So on boards, not only are there usually wealthy people, but they're usually people who have like a legal background, an accounting background, other things like that that wouldn't be normally in a museum or whatever sort of organization you are, and yet are necessary when you're running an entity. So let's get into some answers. Oops. Okay, first one. take a crash course, tour, ask questions, have some informational interviews. So you as the board member who care, which that's half the battle, thank you for caring, and who are curious, excuse me, you will find typically that many staff would love to have a conversation with you, not only to know and get to know you better and what your hopes are for the board and role for the board, but to share what they're doing. So I definitely encourage you to ask for a tour, ask to speak with staff informally, and get the on the ground information, because the people who have the best ideas and have the information at hand are those staff members. And so I definitely recommend you making this a routine thing where all the board members periodically go through and educate themselves, get to know people, get to know what the issues, challenges, opportunities are. The next point, I recommend you use your secret sauce in your position on the board. And so, what I mean by the secret sauce is if you've been asked or invited to be on the board, it's usually because you have that area of expertise that they need. So whether it was legal, financial, etc., whatever you're experienced and an expert in, critically think about how you can use that and your position on the board to make both the organization and the staff that work there better. And this may be a perfect thing to ask when you're meeting with staff is, how can I make your job easier? How can I help support and solve for challenges or support you in these opportunities? So do that. Next thing is to take an active leadership slash representative role in the larger community. So one of the other reasons you're on the board is you are an outsider, and you most likely have those connections and at least have that authoritative role as a member of the board to go to city council meetings, to go and help lobby for the organization, to go and ask corporations to sponsor an event, things like that. So use your role and your position of power and visibility to help push those things. Another point is to advocate within and without. So internally and externally. So using that position and that visibility externally, like the previous point, but also knowing that you can help make staff lives better and work better by helping to advocate for them within, because executive directors, those in the higher levels of administration, from my observation and experience, put more credence and more emphasis and more attention on what they perceive the board to want, what they want to have happen, what they want to see, and listen less and prioritize lower the staff that does the work. However, if you are a board member and you are supporting and echoing what the staff has told you and has asked for, that helps redirect the executive and whoever the higher ups are to actually view both the board and their staff on a more equal footing. So you as a board member helping with that redirect is so powerful. Another thing to think about is re-emphasize how accurate compensation is good for the collections, and it helps meet diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion initiatives. You as a board member caring about that and tying it to whatever strategic initiatives you have, which is part of the board, that helps. And being the person advocating for that accurate compensation of everybody will help when it's coming from you. And then another thing to think about is limit volunteer positions to truly volunteer activities and require all internships to be paid. So I do a whole webinar that I'll link to, which talks about the difference between what is appropriate and ethical volunteer positions versus internships. And you as a board member, while this isn't directly your purview, this is another thing that you can emphasize with the executive director, higher ups, what have you, that this needs to be in place, again, to help meet those DEI initiatives, and again, to make sure you are not undercutting the value of your collection workers by having new professionals and volunteer, perhaps non-skilled workers doing that work for free. Don't do that. So thank you for those great questions. It really got at the heart of what I wanted to talk about today with you. So thank you so much for sharing those. These are the main resources that we covered throughout the slides that I dropped in the chat box. Then I'll also include in the YouTube description. And for everyone who registered, you'll get an email with a link to the recording and all of these resources. So don't feel like you have to scroll them down furiously. You will get a copy tomorrow. Resources continued. We did not cover this one directly, but the Digital Libraries Federation, I believe, Digital Library Federation, I always get that one messed up. They have done an amazing job gathering all of the resources that exist for libraries, archives, museums, historians, etc. You've got salary surveys in here, you have advocacy toolkits in here, so much great information. Negotiation strategy is in here, so much good stuff. So please go check out that resource. Thank you to DLF and to Clear, who is, I think, the overarching parent there, Council on Library and Information Resources. Go check them out. Check out those resources, especially the ones that are pertinent to whatever field that you're in, and get those additional supports and resources that I couldn't all pack into this hour that we had together. All right, questions and connections. The usual stuff, email consulting@rachelchristine.com. If you have remaining questions, check out my website if you're interested in the services that I offer. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if we haven't connected already. Twitter if you're a Twitter person. And then this webinar and all the webinars that I have done so far, they are on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/C/Rachel Christine Consulting. And then for many of you, if you're doing these webinars with me, you're already on the newsletter, but just in case, if you are not, I recommend you signed up, because any of the webinars that I do get pushed out to my community first. So between those and free resources, I recommend you sign up.